it's Jennifer from Flux. Welcome to week 6 of the 2019 Flux Holiday Crochet Along. The Holiday Crochet Along is one of my most favorite projects of the entire year. It's always so fun and festive, and this year we're making a really extra special project. If you've missed any of the tutorials, we're on week 6, so I'll put all the links down below for any weeks that you may have missed. But we are making the Merry Little Advent Calendar. Now, I've had a lot of requests to make an Advent calendar in the past. So I've had this idea for quite some time, and I've been working hard behind the scenes of putting it together. So just to recap, week 1 we talked about the supplies, all the yarn and all the little supplies you might need. Week 2 we created the base. So this snow ground and blue sky, and we topped it off with this red edging. Week 3, we made this really basic triangle shaped tree with some snow made out of crochet chains. Week 4, we learned how to make all the shapes. All of our shapes are one round shapes. So we have a 6-point snowflake, we have a 5-point star, we have heart ornaments, we have circle ornaments of different colors, and we put some presents under the tree. So there's little square shapes with little yarn bows on them. So the next week, one more week, we made a storage bag. So this little drawstring pouch to store all of your shapes in. And then as each day passes, you take one out of the bag and you button it onto your scenery. So today is a very exciting day for this crochet along, I gotta say, because we're gonna learn how to take all the shapes that we have, and I'm gonna show you, this is all gonna be taken apart in just one moment. This is the finished piece, but in just a minute, we're gonna put it all together. So we're going to take our base, we're going to attach our tree first and our snow, and then we're going to sew a bunch of buttons onto our scenery so we can attach all of our little pieces on here. We're also going to be creating some embellishments as an option. I had some pom-pom ribbon I just thought would be really fun across the top. We're going to learn how to put the dowel rod on, and we're going to learn how to create a little hanger so you can hang your scenery up, your advent calendar up on the wall. And you can kind of put this nearby to store your pieces and take one out as you need one each day. So let's learn how to put this all together. Now, just before we get started, be sure and use the hashtag FiberFluxCal, and I'll put that above so you can share your work on social media. I know a lot of you do that. It's so much fun to see what everybody's doing. And if you haven't joined our 2 groups, we have a Ravelry Crochet Along group and we have a Facebook Crochet Along group. And those are both 2 very active communities where people share their work. They ask questions. There's a lot of you who are seasoned crochet people and have been crocheting a very long time. And those of you who do that, I see a lot of people jumping in and helping other people. So it's a really wonderful, positive space. So join those 2 groups if you haven't done that yet. So let's jump into the tutorial today and learn how to put this beautiful calendar all together. So I've laid everything out so you can kind of see what we're going to be using today. We have our base that we made a couple weeks ago. We have our tree that we're going to be gluing down. And we also have our pieces in our pouch here. So we're going to be sewing a whole bunch of buttons on today so we can kind of button all of the pieces on. Now, these are little tiny buttons, so we're also going to be using some needle and thread. I went over all of these supplies in week 1 of our crochet along. You can also check out that video too if you'd like. We have the bows to our packages, we have scissors, tapestry needle, we have our dowel rod, and I also grabbed a little bit of trim and the snow for our trees. And before you get started, you'll want to fire up your glue stick if you're gluing the pieces down. Now, this is totally up to you. You can do a tapestry needle and matching yarn to sew the tree on and some of the other things like the snow to your tree. I'm going to glue those pieces on, but again, it's totally up to you. We are going to be sewing the buttons on though, because if we glued them onto our piece, obviously they wouldn't be able to go on and come off. And we don't want to glue the buttons on, because when you glue buttons onto something, when you put glue on them and press, the glue comes to the edges of the button and it makes it not able to have an edge to button something on. So you do have to sew the buttons on to your piece. The first thing we want to do though is get our dowel rod onto the top of our base here. So figure out, now we did the edging, so before it was reversible, but when we did the edging it now has a definite front and back. So make sure your sewing it with the front side facing up. You want that to show. Now we're going to get some red yarn that we used to do the edging, or whatever color you did your edging, and we're just going to thread our tapestry needle and then cut a long piece, maybe like, I don't know, like 2 feet or so, I would guess. Okay, so we want to do that, and I'm at the end of my skein, so sometimes when that happens, get a couple knots. Okay, so maybe like 2 feet. You could even go 3 feet if you feel more comfortable. I always cut a little extra. Okay, so the next thing you'll want to do is to sew this onto your dowel rod, okay, or your whatever stick that you're using to hold the piece up. Now, it doesn't have to be perfectly positioned. What we're going to do is sew it on, and then we're going to make sure the dowel rod is centered, and then I'm going to put on the back just a little dot of glue so it doesn't slide off, okay? So what we want to do is come up from, we're going to start at one of the corners, one of those stitches, and we're going to come up from the back, and we're going to pull it through, almost through till there's like an inch or so left. And then what we're going to do is tie it on to our dowel rod. Just going to tie it right on just like that. Give it a nice strong knot. And so now we have it attached. Now there is a little bit of play if you need to re-center it later. And we are going to tack a little bit of glue just onto the back where nobody can see, just to kind of hold everything in place. Now what I'm going to do too is slide some of the stuff out of the way so you can see what I'm doing here. We'll weave this tail in later. We're not going to worry about that tail right now. Okay, so the next thing we want to do is just sort of sew, come up from the back and go around and just sort of sew this dowel rod right on to our piece. So we're just going to go around the dowel rod, come up from the back, go through the next stitch. We're going to go across every stitch here and sew it right on. So come up from the back, go into the next stitch, just like that, okay? And we're just going to do that all the way across, okay? So go ahead and stitch that right on there. And if you go into each stitch like I'm doing, you'll ensure that everything is nice and neat and evenly spaced. So these red stitches across the top here will be more evenly spaced if you're sticking with going through every stitch, okay? So go ahead and sew this all the way across, going around the dowel rod, up through the bottom, catching each stitch all the way across, okay? So I'm going to continue across here with my my sewing and my yarn and my dowel rod, and we'll rejoin in just a moment, and I'm going to show you how to finish it up. Okay, we're coming right up to the edge here. Now I worked it into the last stitch, but you also want to make sure that you go into one of those corner stitches as well, just to get that corner worked in there too, okay? Now what you want to do is flip it over to the back, and you're just going to kind of come in that back loop, and we're going to create a little knot to tie it into place, okay? So just go in there with your needle, picking up that loop, and then sending it through the center, so you just make a little knot on the back part of your work here, okay? Then what you'll want to do is just take your tapestry needle and just weave it down in there. Let me just zoom back in there for you. Okay, so we're just going to kind of weave it into the back stitches here so that everything's nice and hidden. Okay, so grab your scissors and give that a little trim. And it looks great. Now let's tackle this side too, because we want to get that end woven in as well. So you want to make sure too that everything is nice and secure so that your piece, I'm just going up under that loop, but you want to make sure your piece is nice and secure because it's going to be hanging. And then we're going to just sort of weave that in to those back loops so it's nice and hidden. We don't want the tails to show. Okay, so give that a nice strong tug and give it a snip. Okay, so our piece is hung. So now what I want to do is just make sure, now you can get a ruler out and even measure, but you just want to make sure that everything is centered, okay? So let's grab our tape measure and just because we're going to tack it down. It's about a little over 1.5 inches. So we need to sort of scoot it this way just a tiny bit, okay? And then make sure all those little ends are nice and straight. Then you can flip your piece back over. Almost looks like a little flag at this point. And what we want to do is grab our hot glue gun, because I'm going to put just a little drop of glue down here so that, now you don't want to go crazy because you definitely don't want it to show from the front, okay? Alright, so you just want to do just the tiniest little drop of glue just to sort of tack it down, okay? Okay, and you can even sort of go up a couple of loops. Just put a couple little drops of glue in there just to hold it in place, okay? So let that dry completely, let it cool and harden completely, and then we're going to move on to the next part. Okay, so our glue has dried and cooled, so now we can flip it back to the front. And what we want to do next is get our tree on there, okay? So we have our snowy scene. And just as a side note, I wanted to show you, I usually use a piece of tin foil when I'm using my hot glue guns because it won't melt. And sometimes, I mean, I know they sell fancy mats and things that you can put under your glue gun, but it gets really, like, sometimes the glue drips out the front. It gets really gunky. I just throw a little piece of tin foil, and it's reusable. You can peel the glue off when you're finished, too. So anyway, just as a side note, in case you're wondering why I have tin foil laying here. All right, so our dowel rod is on there. It's secure. The next thing we want to do is get our tree on here. So you'll want to position your tree however you like. Now we have our snow on the bottom. We have our sky on top. Now you can put it along the horizon line here and just have it sort of hanging out like that. Or you can kind of bring it down a little bit and give it a little bit of like some depth, like it's sort of closer to you, okay? I'm going to kind of put mine here. You can put yours in the middle of the snow. It's really up to you, but just take into account how much sky that you'll have left and how balanced it all looks. And you also have to fit all of the gifts under the tree later on. So just kind of work it back and forth until you get the amount of space you like. Now I have lots of sky for my snowflakes, so I did scoot mine up a little bit. I like mine just slightly below that tree line, just to give it a little bit of dimension. Now, our tree is reversible, but you'll want to pick the side that you like the best. It really doesn't matter because we work this in rows, so your tree will be pretty much the same on both sides. So, but if you have a favorite side, definitely keep that side facing upward. We're going to grab our glue gun, that was a mouthful, and glue our tree next. Okay, so what we want to do is flip our tree over. Now, when you're hot gluing crocheted items like this, you want to do very light ribbons, okay? You don't want to gunk it on there because what will happen is it will seep out of the bottom. Now, yarn, this is acrylic yarn, so it can melt. But if you're doing light ribbons like I'm doing here, you see I'm just doing like rows of like light little ribbons, it'll be just fine. Now the other trick is to get those edges nice, but don't come too close to the edge because it'll kind of goop out the sides. And then you want to work quickly because hot glue does dry pretty quickly. So flip your piece over and then get it positioned. Remember how you wanted it? Get it positioned on there. Now you get one shot at this, so be very careful. And then what you want to do is just lightly press. Hot glue sticks very well to crochet pieces because it gets down in all those fibers. So you don't need to smash it down. It'll really hook on there, okay? And I love hot gluing things that I don't wear. So this will be hanging up. It's a decoration. So we want to you know, you can glue these items. For things you wear, you wouldn't really want to do that, okay? So make sure that cools and dries completely, and then let's shift over. We're going to grab, I have all of my little items here. The next thing we want to glue are our packages. So all the squares that we made last week, you want to grab all those squares. Make sure you're grabbing squares and not like a circle by accident. But we had 2 blue, 2 gold, and 2 green, which I have up here. And let me just kind of shift all this over. We're going to let that cool for a minute. And we want to grab all of our little bows. Remember the little bows that we made? So figure out how you want them to go. Now you can go across, but remember you'll be covering that hole when you button it on there. Let's zoom in a little bit. So what I'm going to do is when we tied them, it makes sort of like a plus. You want to bring one of those tails down like this to make a bow. See how I'm holding it down like that? You want to hold it in place. And then grab your glue gun. And you're going to just do a tiny little dot of glue right onto the package. Again, don't goop it on there. You just want to do like this tiny little dot of glue. And see how I'm going in a circle? That'll kind of minimize those strings that you get, okay? And then we're just going to tack that bow right on there. And this takes a steady hand, so be patient with it. We're just going to sort of press that gift bow into place. And at this time, while the glue is still pliable, you can position it, okay? And then just set it aside. And you have a cute little present with a bow. You can set that aside, and we're going to glue the rest of these. All right, all of our packages have bows, and I have to say they look really cute. So what we want to do next is we're going to add the snow to our tree, okay? So what we want to do is grab the snow. Now I did those when we did the tree. When we crocheted the tree, we worked on the snow. Now you can put the snow on first and then glue your tree down. I left a little bit of an edge so I can tuck it. So what we want to do next is slide our gifts. Our packages can kind of hang out over here and dry. So position your snow. Now this also takes a steady hand because we want to get like our tree, when you see trees in real life, they sort of have like a rounded cone shape. So we want to sort of put a slight curve onto our snow because that will give it that nice tree shape, okay? Now we have our ends. We're not going to worry about those ends right now. So let's do one of our snow pieces here. What we're going to do is very carefully, now you can also sew this, any of this stuff you can sew at this point. We're going to carefully put a thin little stripe of glue down for our tree. Now I'm not going goopy. We want to keep it nice and thin, okay? Whoops, and then we're going to take, now again, you can do this first if it's easier for you. We're going to take our, now get that, you can kind of create a curve by like, before you lay it down, by sort of pushing it inward like that, okay? And then we're going to lay it down and you can tap it just ever so lightly with your finger into place, okay? Just like that, all right? Next, take your middle piece and repeat, okay? So once again, you may not want to glue right over top of your piece in case something drips down, but you're going to put a nice thin strip down, lay that down, okay? So we're going to do the middle piece and the larger piece. Okay, so I'm just sort of tapping that last one. Now I would recommend starting with this short top one because it's a lot easier to kind of manipulate and position into place, and then by the time you get the longer two, you'll be an expert at it, okay? So I would recommend sort of doing the small one first. Okay, so now we have these ends to deal with. And I'm going to cut them a little bit shorter, okay? So just trim them off a little bit. We're going to tuck them in under our tree. Okay, so what we want to do is get our, we can kind of roll up the edge. I'm going to tack down the edge too, but you can kind of put a little drop of glue down and then just kind of wrap it around, stuff it in there, and tuck it down, okay? If it's easier for you to do the snow first, I completely understand. But I kind of wanted to get it glued down to the surface here instead, because it'll hold it into place. Okay, so kind of wrap it around and then like tack it down, okay? Like I mentioned before, it takes a steady hand, but I like that look that it's wrapped around the tree instead of just laying on top. Okay, so lift up a side and just take your little string and tack it down, okay? And the other thing you can do too is if you have any edges at this point that are sort of sticking up, you can tack them down. Remember, just with any crocheted item, to not really goop on the glue. Go nice and sparing. And again, the hot glue behaves really nicely with yarn because it gets into all those fibers. You can really get a good seal on that, okay? Now we're going to come around here. Now that's setting up, so we're going to do this middle one. And just get a little dab of glue down there at the bottom. Now, if you have glue seeping to the back side of your project, it's totally fine. It's really not going to show. Let's get that tucked in and then tack it down. Okay. Our beautiful scene is starting to really come together beautifully. I love it. Okay, just kind of wrap that tail around. This is a little long. I'm going to trim this. Okay, and then just sort of wrap it around and then tack it down onto your project. Now, go around your tree at this time, now that we've gotten the snow on. And again, if it's easier to put the snow on first, I totally understand. As I was making this, I was like, maybe I should have put the snow down first. But you know, we can do it a multitude of ways. Okay, and then any little pieces that are sort of sticking up, you want to come around with your glue. I got one here I need to tack down and just kind of tack that down, okay? Now, I will say as a side note, if you have any areas where you have glue showing, like if it's oozed out the side, you can creatively position one of your pieces on there, okay? The next thing we're going to do, we are in the home stretch. We really are coming along wonderfully with this. The next thing we want to do is we're going to later put some trim on this. Remember at the beginning of our tutorial, I mentioned you could, if you have some ribbon, you can glue that on. But what we want to do next is we're going to sew all the buttons onto our project. So what we want to do next is gather up all of your pieces. We have our gold star, we have our ornaments, and what you want to do is position them how you want them to go. What I would recommend is tackling each part. So tackle all the snowflakes first, tackle all of the ornaments next. You know, you want to do it part by part. But if you need to, real quick, before you start sewing buttons, if you need to start laying things out, and you can take like a Sharpie or something like that, and you can even kind of mark where you want your buttons to go. I would recommend that, actually. It will help you position everything. But before you commit to permanently sewing your buttons down, you'll want to make sure that you like where everything is positioned first, okay? So just kind of get everything where you want it to go, and you might need to kind of go back and forth a little bit, sort of push and pull through here to get the design and positioning that you like. So get your ornaments down, get the snowflakes down. So what we're going to do next is sew all of these little buttons onto our project, okay? I'm going to show you how to do one of them, and then we're going to kind of run with it, okay? So let's do that next, okay? All right, so I decided to do the gifts first. I just love them, and I wanted to get them on there. So I went ahead and positioned them on there, and I'm going to start with this green. I grabbed a green button. I sort of coordinated my buttons, just as a side note. Now I have some green thread that sort of matches my button, and my little scissors. And if you have trouble threading a needle, I have a video, you can search it in YouTube, on how to thread a needle using a needle threader. They're wonderful, wonderful tools to help you thread your needle. And because the eyes of these sewing needles are super tiny, they're like ridiculously tiny. Okay, so we kind of have an idea of how we want everything positioned. And so what I'm going to do is sort of, remember we're going through the middle hole, so I'm going to sort of hold that over, move it out of the way, and drop it down, okay? So we know where to put it. And we're going to kind of hold it in place, and let me zoom in so you can see what I'm doing here. we're just going to sew this button right on, okay? Now I am not one who sews much, so just do the best you can. I mean, we use tapestry needles in crochet a lot, but you know, I don't use a needle and thread. It's just a lot of precision. There's a lot of teeny tininess that is, it's hard to see, honestly. So, okay, so I'm just going to go in a few times with my thread. And then back down. Just make sure you get those a couple times through there. And then what we're going to do is, I'm just going to tie it. We can cut the needle off so it's not going to poke us. But see the two ends that we have left? I know it's tiny, but you can kind of like tie that on. And we don't really need to weave in the ends because of the smallness. And it's the back side, so you got a little bit of leeway here. If you really don't want any of this stuff to show, you could always get a piece of fabric or felt and sort of sew it or glue it to the back if you need to do that, okay? So I'm just going to tie it. And I feel like my fingers are just in the way here. Okay, so I got it tied on there, and just give it a little snip. Okay, and now we have a cute little button on our project. And let's see the moment of truth. Now we have our center hole, and we're going to sew on the first day of the holiday season, December 1st, which is what we're going to call it for this calendar's purposes. You're just going to button your gift right on there, okay? And it looks adorable. Really, really cute. Okay, so let's go through and sew the rest of the buttons on here. So this is one of those projects where you maybe want to pop a movie in, get comfy, because you're going to sew lots of buttons, 25 to be exact. So we're going to do our gifts, then we're going to sew some ornaments. So I'm going to get busy and do some major sewing here, and then we're going to look at all the buttons when we're finished and kind of button everything on and see how it looks. And then if we need to do a little bit of trim or add a couple little extra things onto our piece, we can do that at that time. So go ahead and get comfy and start sewing some buttons, and we'll rejoin in just a moment. So here are all the buttons. They've all been sewn on, and all the pieces have been buttoned on, so you can see what it looks like. The last thing we have to do, so we have our little pouch, we have all of our pieces, we are in the home stretch, and I have to say, each part of this crochet along that we've made and assembled has just been more and more exciting. The build up to the final piece has been really exciting to share. I wanted to add some embellishments. They're completely optional. I have this fun pom-pom ribbon. I have a piece that's almost exactly just a little bit wider, so it's perfect for this project. And I found some green rickrack that was super festive. And we need to be able to hang our project. So we're going to take some of this green rickrack and just go up and over and back down and tie it here so we can hang it up on the wall. So let's get, once again, I have my hot glue gun fired up. And we're not going to need any special tools right now, just our glue gun, and you can grab a pair of scissors also. So let me just grab a little pair of scissors. And so I have it all heated up now, and we're going to, let me just remove the pom-pom because we're going to do some rickrack across the edge here, right where we sewed our dowel rod on, where it meets that. So I'm going to flip this over just so I can get to it, and I don't, whenever you're hot gluing stuff like this, just kind of get your work away from you, pointing the other way, so you don't want to drip a trail of glue all over your project. You want the working area to be closest to you, okay? So I cut a piece that sort of hangs off either side, and then what I'm going to do is, see how I've positioned it, I have it kind of where the red meets the blue. So I'm just going to put, once again, a nice, thin little stripe all along this edge here, and you don't want to go too heavy because it'll ooze out the sides and it'll look kind of sloppy. And we're just going to go to the edge. We're not going to worry about folding it over at this time. And I just want to go, I'm sort of like dragging the tip of this through the glue just to make sure we have even coverage, okay? And then get all those little strings off that hot glue is so notorious for. We can set it back on our little tinfoil placemat. Next, let's take our rickrack or ribbon. You can use whatever you want. This is a great way to use up some of those little holiday things that you may have. We're going to take our rickrack and we're just going to sort of press it very lightly, use a very light touch for this, into the glue. Now again, you don't want to burn your fingers, but also you don't want all this messy glue to ooze out, okay? So we're going to let that sort of set up before we fold it over. But while we wait, we can grab, if you want to do another piece of ribbon, or I love this pom-pom, I guess you could call it ribbon, garland, what have you, but I had a piece just the right length for this project. So I'm going to put mine just below my rickrack, and it just comes up to that first snowflake, so we don't want it to go like over top and be messy. We just bring it right up to the edge there, okay? So once again, I'm going to go just where these points of this rickrack fall and do another little stripe of glue. So we can scoot this out of the way. And I'm just going to go right along. You can use your crochet rows as a guideline for your glue, but you're just going to go right along those points with the glue and just stop at the edge. We'll tuck everything behind it in just a moment. So pom-poms are tricky. Make sure they're all pointing the same direction. They're all hanging downward. And then you're going to kind of bring it up to it, just like that, okay? And you're just going to lay it down nice and neat. And then just, once again, lightly, with a light touch, tap it into place. So just tap, tap, tap all the way across. Make sure you're getting the glue down in those fibers. You're kind of pressing it with a light touch. Once again, you're kind of pressing it into those fibers. You can straighten out all those little pom-poms later. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is grab our little scissors, and once this is completely cool and dry, now it dries pretty fast, but just you don't want to flip it over and it adhere to your table and then it will show through. So what you're going to do is carefully flip this over, and again, you want to face your work away from you. And what we're going to do is we're going to fold this over. Now, I don't want these pom-poms to be behind my work because it'll be, it'll create some bulk or some bulge in my work. So we do want to snip the pom-poms off, but leave that ribbon on there. Now, you may not be using pom-pom ribbon like I am, but you want to, if you are using it, and it comes in green, red, you could look for some blue to match your sky, but you do want to snip the pom-poms off before you glue it along the back here. So grab your hot glue gun once again, and if you notice, I'm going to put a little bit just along this ribbon, and then bring it up and just sort of, once again, just sort of tap it into place. Again, don't use too much glue, because especially on the back here, you don't want it to ooze to the front. That would be the worst. Both sides have been glued up, so let's flip it back over, and you can see it's just a little bit of embellishment. Now, if you had some other stuff, you could put some along the edge. You could do some, if you have, I have a single bell, so I'm not really sure how I would use that, but if you had, you could put some bells along the bottom. You could really add a little bit more to this if you like. I just wanted a little detail at the top. I'm going to take the same rickrack from this detailing here and tie it to the top. Now once again, let's flip this over. I'm going to tie mine to the top so it kind of matches the other section here. But what I'm going to do now, since I have my hot glue gun out, I'm going to just leave yourself a nice long tail, but I'm going to tie it right to the edge where it comes up to the edge of this crocheted section. Just give it a nice snug little tie here. And leave that tail, because I'm going to show you how to hide it. Now come up here, just kind of like, and I'm going to give it just like a little loop here. Just come around like that. And depending on how you want to hang it, now this is probably way too long, so we want to bring it in a hair. So just bring it in, I'm going to say right about there, okay? So what we can do is take the other end here. Now you can save this for another project too. Maybe if you're making one as a gift, you could save some of your scraps here. And I'm just going to tie that right on. Go ahead and pull that through. Now rickrack is a little bit tricky to tie because it's got those bumpy scalloped edges, but Just go nice and slow. It'll be just fine. And then what you want to do when you're done is, you don't need all this length. So just cut, so you got just a couple inches here. And then take your glue gun and you can just do a little blob of glue and then just tack that back so nobody will see that. Okay, just tack that down, and then this is probably a little too much here, so we can trim that too. And then on the same other side, you're just gonna just put a little blob of glue, and then you can just tack that right down, okay? Now be careful with the rickrack because of the little scallops in it. It's a little bit easier to burn your hand because it kind of comes out the sides there. So just be really careful. You can use a tool. Probably don't want to use my scissors here, but it's a little bit, I mean, this last blob came out a little bit goopy on me. Okay, so once you're done, we can flip it back over and look how beautiful. It is completely finished. So I really hope you enjoyed this project. I love the holiday crochet along. It's one of my favorite things we do all year. We have our beautiful rickrack top. We have our detailing. We made a beautiful base, a lovely tree with a gold star at the top, our snowflakes, all these buttons and packages at the bottom. It's truly a unique advent calendar. And then we have a little pouch to store it all in. So I really hope you enjoyed this project, and I hope you have a wonderful holiday. Before we finish, be sure and use the hashtag FiberFluxCal to share your work on social media. Join our 2 groups, our Ravelry group, our Facebook group, and share your work. I can't wait to see all of yours. Some of you have been sharing things already, and I'm super excited to see everything. So happy holidays, and enjoy this project, share this project, and I will see you in the spring for our next crochet along. Thanks so much for watching, and be sure and click the subscribe button to get all the latest FiberFlux video updates. Bye everyone!